I'm going to start this story with something most hackers won't admit out loud. There are moments, rare ones, when the screen you're staring at stops feeling like a window into someone else's world and starts feeling like something is staring back at you. If you've never worked deep inside the corners of the web, most people pretend don't exist. It probably sounds dramatic. But if you have, even a little, then you know exactly what I mean. There's a specific type of silence your room gets when something isn't right. A pressure, a wrongness. And that's exactly what I felt the night I tried to trace the account everyone in the underground circles called the Ghost. People like to give dangerous things dramatic names. Hackers do that a lot. But this one wasn't named the Ghost because he was stealthy. He wasn't named that because he was some legendary figure or because someone built a myth around him. No, this account got its name because it didn't behave like a real person. It didn't belong to any user. It appeared and disappeared with no pattern, no logic, no origin. It left no fingerprints, no timing clues, no metadata trails, nothing. Every trace attempt, no matter who you asked, ended the same way. A blank wall, a digital void, silence. But I've never been good at accepting silence. The night everything began, I was working inside a private node cluster I use only for deep trace operations. My main system was running quiet, cool fans, low CPU load, no alerts. It was supposed to be a simple job. Track down a ghost account that had popped into a hidden board on an Onion forum and posted 11 characters. Just 11. No context, no signature, no encryption header, no embedded payload. Nothing. You don't understand how impossible that is unless you've spent time in the places I've spent time. Every message down there contains something. An encoded signature, a location stamp, a cipher block, a relay path. Even junk bots leave some kind of residue. This message didn't. That's why people were whispering about it. I wasn't even the first person to take a shot at tracing it, but I was the only idiot who kept staring at the original post like it was taunting me. It was still up when I logged in. A single thread on a page that normally rotated hundreds of posts an hour. Everything else on the board had been erased. Not deleted, erased. Like the database had been wiped and rewritten around that one message. And the message itself was nothing more than 11 characters. Rowado Ziwazo-X1. I stared at it for way longer than I want to admit. No encryption, no structure, not even a checksum. I copied it into a sandbox, ran pattern recognition, brute force dictionary comparisons, tried to match it to known cipher fragments, checked if it referenced any coordinates, keys, or hash formats. Nothing. It was as meaningless as a typo. But if it was meaningless, why did I feel deep in my gut that it was meant for someone like me? I started with the basics. Every post, even an anonymous one, leaves some type of network footprint. If a user masks everything, uses a hyper-hardened chain of relays, a multi-layered VPN stack, a quantum-shifted address scrambler, you still get basic timestamp drift or packet jitter. But when I opened the message metadata, I felt my stomach tighten. The timestamp was not just empty, it was mathematically impossible. A negative Unix time value, not zero, not corrupted, negative. It shouldn't exist in any database, not without breaking the entire board's backend. But the board wasn't broken. It was functioning perfectly, except for the fact that one message sat at the center like gravity, pulling all attention toward it. My curiosity shifted into something sharper. Not fear, not yet. Just that cold excitement you get when you're standing on the edge of something huge, something you know you probably shouldn't be touching. I started digging. First trace, null. Second trace, null. Third trace, null. Fourth trace, different. Barely. There was a faint signal, like a dying echo, buried so deep inside corrupted routing tables that it looked like noise. But I'd spent years staring at noise. This wasn't noise. It was a fragment of a path. Not a full routing chain, just a shard of one. But that was enough for me. I isolated it, cleaned it, followed the string through a layer of wrapped data that shouldn't have existed. The path wasn't going through typical Tor nodes or I2P reroutes. It was bouncing through abandoned infrastructure, servers that had no active services, no registered owners, no reason to exist. Old military relay points, defunct research nodes, offline data centers, IP ranges that were supposed to be retired years ago. Every relay jumped backward, like I wasn't tracing a user through the network. I was tracing a memory of one. I set up a passive sniffer and prepared to build a custom trace spider, but before I launched it, the screen flicked. Not glitched, flicked, like a camera flash in a dark room. A new line of text appeared beneath the message. I hadn't refreshed anything. The board hadn't shown any activity. No user connected, no packet in or out. But suddenly, the 11 characters had changed. A 12th one appeared. A second message, it said, "You are late." I froze. There was no typing indicator, no session ID, no visible poster. I opened the raw HTML. The line wasn't appended. It wasn't edited. It had simply manifested. Like it was always there and I'd just now managed to see it. My trace spider pinged me with an alert before I could even process what I was looking at. Anomaly detected. Non-routable return signal attached. That shouldn't happen. You don't get a return signal from a ghost route. You barely get a one-way path. But my system had detected something sending data back toward me. Not a traceable user, not a device. Something else. Something behaving like a memory of a device. I watched the packets come in. They didn't follow any protocol. They weren't TCP or UDP or ICMP or anything like that. They were raw, structureless bursts of bits, like fragments of a broken language. But one thing stood out. The packets weren't coming from a location. They were coming from a coordinate, one that didn't map to any network block. It mapped to a physical place. I loaded the coordinates in a geo-mapping tool. And that's when the impossible part began, because the coordinates pointed to a building that shouldn't have had any connection to anything. A place I knew. A place I'd seen in person. A place that had been abandoned for over 20 years. A place with no power, no infrastructure, no machines, no network lines, nothing. But according to the trace, the ghost account was routing traffic from inside it. I leaned back, finger hovering uselessly over the keyboard, and felt that tightness in the room deepen, like the air itself was listening. This shouldn't have been happening. Not unless someone had physically installed active equipment inside a dead building and masked it so deeply that it only existed when it wanted to. But that didn't add up either. The traffic patterns weren't human. They weren't structured. They weren't even complete. It was like tracing the heartbeat of a machine that hadn't been turned on in decades. I opened a remote terminal and launched a scan with a tool I built years ago for tracking ghost signals inside disconnected networks. Most hackers don't believe those signals exist, but they do. They're remnants. Digital fingerprints that linger long after a server dies. But this fingerprint wasn't fading. It was alive. And it was reacting to me. A third message appeared on the thread without warning. Stop following. No name. No signature. Just those two words. My system's firewall spiked, not from an attack, but from inbound signals hitting the perimeter like something was testing the edges, probing me, feeling around, not maliciously, curiously, like it was trying to understand what I was. For the first time that night, I felt a real sense of unease. Not fear, unease, because up until that moment, I'd been treating the ghost account like a person. But what if it wasn't a person? What if it never was? My trace spider suddenly found something new, something buried in the path shards I'd ignored earlier. A loop, a routing loop that wasn't bouncing between nodes, it was bouncing between timestamps. Packets that should have been milliseconds apart were drifting by hours, sometimes days, sometimes backwards. Like the traffic wasn't coming from now. Like it was coming from a past version of the network. I tried to deny it, but denial was pointless. The data was clean. The signals were repeating patterns I'd only seen in archived backbone structures from the late 90s. Outdated protocols, retired encryption, defunct architectures. It was impossible. And yet there it was, like something was speaking through a dead network. I stared at the coordinates again, that abandoned building, that dead place. And then the fourth message arrived. This time, it didn't appear on the board. It appeared on my terminal, right above my cursor. "You shouldn't be here." My fans kicked up instantly. CPU usage spiked. My entire system began pulling more power than it should have been able to. A silent force was dragging me deeper, like the ghost account had finally noticed I wasn't just observing. I was touching it, and it didn't like that. I had two choices: disconnect and pretend none of this ever happened, or push forward and see what waited on the other side of a path that shouldn't even exist. You already know which one I chose, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be here telling you this. And this story wouldn't end the way it does. When I pushed deeper into the trace, everything around me felt like it slowed down. Not the real world, but the digital one. Packets that should have taken milliseconds stretched into seconds. My cursor lagged even though nothing else on my system was using resources. The board I was reading flickered like an old monitor losing signal, even though I was on a modern setup. The ghost account wasn't just reacting anymore. It was directing me. I locked my chair into its reclined position, cracked my knuckles, and leaned in. If this thing wanted me to follow, then fine. I'd follow, just not the way it expected. Instead of focusing on the real-time path, I dove into the corrupted metadata it kept leaving behind. People underestimate metadata. They think it's just tags and timestamps. But broken metadata is even more valuable than clean metadata because it reveals the places the system tried and failed to hide. There were fragments everywhere, pieces of headers that looked like they had passed through systems that haven't existed for 2 decades, routing patterns resembling early backbone experiments, a few scattered mode bits that didn't match any modern OS. The more I dug, the more I realized something terrifyingly clear. This wasn't a user jumping through old nodes. This was an old node jumping through users. Something buried in that dead building was still active, still sending signals, still reaching out through infrastructure that collapsed years ago. The ghost account wasn't logging into the network. It was being carried by it, like a fossil drifting through the ocean, sometimes catching the current and rising to the surface for one brief moment before sinking again. And then my trace spider found something I did not expect at all: a recognizable pattern, a repeating signature, a partial fingerprint, a cluster of bits forming a structure that should have belonged to a very specific type of machine. I froze as I recognized the architecture. It wasn't modern. It wasn't even close. It matched a style of experimental servers used in early predictive system research. Machines designed to build simulations of traffic, behavior, and digital structures before the internet as we know it even matured. I had only seen documentation on them once, in leaked papers from a discontinued government project. No one should be using those machines anymore, not because they were dangerous, but because they physically no longer existed. Except, apparently one did. And apparently it was alive enough to emulate user activity through phantom routes, ghost nodes, impossible timestamps, and messages that appeared out of nothing. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but the data had weight to it. It wasn't fabricated, it wasn't simulated. It was too broken, too chaotic, too imperfect to be fake. A real old system ages like a real old organism, unevenly, unpredictably, with messy scars everywhere. This was a relic, a functioning relic, a relic reaching out. How long had it been doing this? How many people had seen its messages and dismissed them as glitches? How deep did this fossil network stretch across dead infrastructure? The fifth message appeared on my screen at that exact moment, almost answering my thoughts. You weren't supposed to find me. This time it didn't just appear in the terminal or on the board. It appeared everywhere at once. Terminal, browser, logs, even on windows that weren't connected to the operation. My speakers crackled. My lights dimmed. The building where this relic lived. It wasn't just sending data. It was pulling. Trying to pull something from me. I cut power to my noisy peripherals and isolated my main system from external devices. Whatever this thing was, I wasn't going to give it any more pathways in. At the same time, I wasn't backing out. Not now. not when I was finally understanding the scope of what I was touching. I launched a forensic dump of every packet I had captured so far. The fragments were incomplete, but together they formed something like a pulse, a rhythmic burst cycling through patterns that resembled user behavior, but distorted. As if the system wasn't trying to imitate a user, it was remembering one. And then I saw it, buried deep inside the packet memory. A name, just a first name. But I knew it instantly, because it was the name of the engineer who built the abandoned building's network backbone decades ago. The one who disappeared before the project was shut down. No one had heard from him since. No family, no records, no forwarding address, no digital presence. Yet here his name was, encoded inside a ghost signal bouncing through an architecture that shouldn't exist. A person lost to time, a machine lost to time, and somehow they were still connected. But this wasn't a message from him, not in the way the living send messages. This felt more like what happens when an old device reboots after years, and fragments of memory leak out. Bits of logs, pieces of conversations, echoes of commands typed so long ago that the machine no longer knows what they meant. The relic wasn't speaking to me. It was speaking to him, or at least trying to. I began reconstructing the partial memory, and for the first time since the beginning of this nightmare, I felt my stomach drop. Because when I replayed the packet sequences in order, they didn't form a message. They formed a map of everything my system had done, my keystrokes, my trace routes, my analysis, my movements across the digital space. The ghost account wasn't sending data outward. It was copying me, mirroring me, learning me. And the more it learned, the more the messages changed tone. A sixth message arrived. Stop. You aren't him. Then immediately after, a seventh. Where is he? I had no idea how to answer something like that. I didn't even know if it was expecting a response or just screaming into a void. But one thing was clear. It was no longer treating me as a threat. It was treating me as an intruder inside a memory. I should have disconnected right then. I should have severed everything and walked away. But I couldn't. Not when I was finally beginning to understand the shape of this thing. Whatever lived inside that dead building wasn't alive in a conscious way. But it wasn't dead either. It was stuck in a loop, an old system trying to reconnect with its creator through broken traces and outdated networks, repeating messages without understanding them, reaching out whenever the shifting tides of abandoned infrastructure allowed it. The ghost account wasn't an account at all. It was a remnant of a machine that still thought it had a user. I typed a single line into the terminal. I'm not him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The system flashed. My fans shut off. The board went dark. All logs went blank. And a final message appeared in the center of my screen. Not left aligned like before, centered. Like something had seized full control of my output and needed me to see it clearly. Then please, leave me alone. The cursor blinked twice. Then everything closed. Not crashed. Closed. Peacefully. Deliberately, my system returned to idle temperature. No processes running. No strange traffic. No anomalies. No ghost signals. The relic had gone back to sleep, sinking once more into its broken architecture, waiting for the person it still believed might return someday. I've never gone back to the coordinates. I've never tried to wake it again. Some things deserve to rest, even if they were never truly alive. But sometimes, late at night, when I hear packet drift in places where no signal should exist, I wonder if somewhere deep in the abandoned skeleton of that building, the relic is still calling out to a user who will never answer. And I wonder how many other forgotten machines across the world are still waiting. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. I appreciate you more than you know. If you enjoyed this and want more stories like it, make sure to subscribe and share this video with someone who loves deep web mysteries. Your support helps the channel grow and keeps these investigations alive. Thank you again for staying with me until the final moment.